This is the Miami and Erie Canal in Providence Metro Park. I'm Darren, and this is the Industrial Revolution. But today, I'm not here to talk about this. I'm actually here to talk about this, the towpath. When we think about canals, we always think about this watery part over here. We think about the canal itself. Maybe we think about locks. If you've spent enough time around canals, you might even think about aqueducts. But if you get right down to it, until the early 1900s, if you didn't have this towpath, you didn't have a canal. The towpath was how you actually were propelled along the canal. It allowed your tow, whether that was horses or mules or oxen or whatever you were using, to actually propel your boat up and down the canal. And there's a lot more to these towpaths than you might think. So as we head downstream here on the Miami and Erie Canal along the towpath, you might wonder, what are the actual requirements for a towpath? It seems pretty basic. Well, there's a whole lot more here than meets the eye. The first thing you'll notice is that the towpath in general also acts as sort of a dam or a levee to actually hold the water in the canal. As we're walking down here, the Miami River is off to the right a ways. Sometimes it's right next to the towpath. Sometimes it gets quite a ways away. But you'll see the towpath's elevated on both sides, and that's to hold in the water of the canal. The towpaths have to be built pretty solid. They have to be able to stand up to a lot of abuse, be able to stand up to the weather. They have to be able to stand up to erosional forces from the boats going by. Towpaths also have to be wide. You have to be able to have two teams of tow animals pass each other on the towpath. So you have a upstream team and a downstream team, and they're going to have to get by each other somewhere on this towpath, wherever those boats actually encounter each other. Now, as far as where you built the towpath, that had a lot more flexibility. Sometimes it was obvious where you'd build it. If you were going along a lake, say, you don't dig a canal to have your canal boats travel along a lake. You just put the canal boat right into the lake or in the reservoir behind a dam that you built to supply water for your canal. Now, what happens when you hit the end of the lake? Well, now typically your towpath has to cross over the canal. You can't just throw the mules in and have them swim over to the other side to get to the towpath. So you have to actually somehow get over the top. So how do you do that? Well, it's not as easy as it sounds, because remember, your canal boat doesn't have a motor on it. It's not self-propelled. You have to be able to cross the towpath somehow with a mule. So you build a bridge. But if you think about it, if you try to build a bridge and you take your canal boat under the bridge and you take your mule over the bridge, now your rope has a problem. And if your tow rope snags the bridge, that's not a good thing for the bridge, the boat, or the mule. So what do? Well, we don't have a lot of examples of that in the States because we got into the canal game kind of late for our towpaths. But if we take a look over in the UK, for example, they still have lots of examples of these bridges that were designed specifically to allow tow animals to cross the canal without needing to unhook the rope. And you can see how, depending on which direction you're going, you'll go up to the side of the canal, up on top of the bridge, across the bridge, spiral around in sort of a cloverleaf pattern on the other side, and go under the bridge. So the tow animal will go up, over, around, and back under, and your rope will never actually have to cross over that bridge. And that means that you aren't going to have a problem with disconnecting. You won't have a problem with reconnecting. and you're able to just continue on your way fairly easily. Now in the States, we never really had this, and well, we had the bridges, of course, but by the time we got into the canal game in the early mid-1800s, we already had steel truss bridges. So instead of these beautiful stone structures, we had a steel truss bridge with a wooden deck, and of course 150 years down the road, 200 years down the road, these are gone. They've all rusted away to nothing. So what happens when a canal shuts down? Well, it's not pretty, but I have the answer for you. This is what happens. The upriver here, we have the original restored section of the Miami Erie Canal. Downriver is the unrestored section. Let's go for a walk down the towpath there, and we can talk about what's going on. One of the first things you'll probably notice is with the canal on our left, there's a lot of trees over there. And when the towpath was in use, obviously you didn't have any trees there. And the reason you had no trees there was because you had to pass your tow ropes across it. With this canal shut down for the last 100 years or so, a lot of trees have been able to regrow. The towpath itself is still in surprisingly good shape though. And that's because these things were built solid. They had to hold back a bunch of water. They had to withstand weathering. They had to withstand animals walking over them constantly. They had to withstand some minor flooding even. So they were built solid. Now, that actually led to some interesting reuses once the canal shut down. Or sometimes even before, because by the early 1900s, these towpaths weren't being used for towing anymore. Canal boats had mostly switched over to motorized use, and even the canals that were still in use, they were no longer being towed, they were being powered by motors. Now, if you take a look at this, one thing you'll notice is it's nice and straight, has wide sweeping curves, it's fairly wide, and if you think about it, what else is fairly straight, fairly level, wide sweeping curves, very gentle hills? And the answer obviously is trains. Towpaths were built by canals. Canals were built to get people and goods from point A to point B. This towpath, this canal, was made to get people and goods from Lake Erie down to Cincinnati on the Ohio River, and then further down the Ohio onto the Mississippi, and even as far as New Orleans. So you already had the destinations. You already had people that wanted to travel there. When the canal was put in place, suddenly you have a lot more people along the canal. Just like today when you build an interstate highway and you have exits on the interstate highway, what happens on the exits? Well, you suddenly find yourself with gas stations, with restaurants, with motels, and the same thing happened on the canals, especially where you had places where you naturally had to slow down. So if you have a series of locks, for example, Lockport, New York, had a 5-step ladder of locks. You could be waiting there for a long time. And by a long time, I mean you could be waiting there for more than a day easily for your boat to get through the locks. And to deal with that, town of Lockport sprang up. When it was built, there was no town there. Lockport was made up of bars, restaurants, inns, theaters, brothels, everything a traveler might want. Once the canal was no longer there, or at least the towpath was no longer needed, people still needed to move from place to place. You still had your destinations at the ends. You still need to get from your mine to your refinery. You still had to get from town to town. Still had to get from a mill to a seaport. whatever the canal was built for, you still needed to do that. As the canal started to wane, towpaths obviously became natural rail beds. They were built solidly enough to handle it. They had ready access to water for the steam locomotives of the time, and they went exactly where you needed to go. So many towpaths wound up simply having a railroad dropped right on top of the towpath, and if the canal shut down, it didn't matter because you had a train there, and the train just took over all the business. Now, as we're walking down this path, and keep in mind the Miami River is just over here on my right. The canal is just over here on the left. There's not that much room here. In fact, there's room here for one rail line. What if you needed more than one? What if you needed two? One for each direction? Well, what often happened, since you still had the same need to travel the same places, is you would actually fill in or partially fill in the canal, and you could stick a rail bed over there. So you have one on the towpath, one in the filled in section of the canal, or maybe just a couple of them in the filled in section of the canal. And that would provide you, again, fairly level access, nice broad sweeping curves, and it went exactly where you needed to go. Well, not everything wound up being a rail bed. In fact, a lot of these canals actually wound up turning into streets and roads. If you look at a map, huge numbers of towns and cities around the world have a canal street or a canal road. Chances are that was a towpath or the filled-in canal. Here along the Miami and Erie Canal, I'm actually just outside of Toledo, and about 7 or 8 miles downstream of here, the canal took a turn to the left. It left the river and headed up along the top of the valley instead of down by the river. From the point where it made that turn all the way through downtown Toledo, that canal has since been filled in, and it's now Anthony Wayne Trail. Anthony Wayne Trail is a major street going through the city of Toledo, and that entire street used to be the Ohio and Erie Canal. So you see another use for towpaths today. Many of them have been cleared and reopened and are currently reused as hike-bike trails. This is part of the Towpaths Trail, part of the Toledo Metro Park system. Also, this particular section of trail here, this is on the Buckeye Trail. It's a very long backpacking trail. It goes hundreds of miles around the perimeter of Ohio, as part of the North Country Backpacking Trail, which crosses many of the northern tier states in the U.S. Towpaths are being reopened around the world. Not that we need towpaths, the canals are being reopened for recreation use as well. The towpaths are being reopened and are creating safe, easy biking corridors, hiking corridors, and also creating new business opportunities with the canals being reopened as well, for opening up restaurants, shops, and inns along the way. So this towpath was built over 150 years ago as a way to be able to actually use the canal here as a towpath for mules and horses to pull canal boats. Today, it's still in use. Today, this is part of the Towpath Trail through the Toledo Metro Park system. It's also a small piece of the Buckeye Trail, which goes all the way around the state of Ohio, and a piece of the North Country Trail. North Country Trail traverses the northern tier of U.S. states. As we watch the canal boat come down the canal here, drawn by its two-mule team, we need to remember that this is a great opportunity to remember history, but we also need to remember this is the Industrial Revolution. Before you go, I do need some help. The easiest thing you can do to help is simply like the video, also subscribe and hit notify. That goes a long ways towards telling YouTube, hey, these videos are worth watching, the channel's good, and it'll show it to more people. More people I have come in, bigger the channel grows. Also, if you can comment or participate over in the discussion tabs, that also goes a long ways towards helping with the video stats. It shows YouTube that people are actually participating and getting involved. Have a Patreon page at patreon.com/Industrial Revolution if you want to help out there as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you at the next one.